You probably know someone like this. Maybe you've noticed it in yourself. A quiet moment in the car, a shower that runs longer than it should, a walk where you never quite arrive because you were somewhere else the entire time. Not distracted, somewhere else. In the middle of a conversation that hasn't happened yet. Winning an argument with someone who doesn't know you're arguing. Replaying something from 3 years ago, this time saying exactly the right thing. This time, finally, getting it right. Maybe it isn't someone else at all. And here is what almost nobody says about this. The people who do this most, the ones whose inner worlds run richest and most relentlessly, are not checked out. They are not lazy. They are not, in the clinical shorthand that gets thrown around so casually, dissociated in any simple sense. What they are, almost without exception, is extraordinarily sensitive to unresolved things, to the conversation that ended wrong, to the threat that never materialized but felt entirely real, to the future that hasn't arrived yet but already feels dangerous. The imagining is not the problem. The imagining is the answer to a problem. And until you understand what question it's answering, you can't understand why it won't stop. The human brain is, at its core, a prediction machine. This is not a metaphor, it is a description of the brain's primary function. Daniel Kahneman, whose decades of research into cognition and decision-making reshaped how we understand human thought, documented how the mind constantly constructs models of what is likely to happen next, running simulations, adjusting probabilities, preparing the body for outcomes that haven't arrived yet. This is adaptive. This is survival. The gazelle that imagines the lion before seeing it lives longer than the one that doesn't. Mental simulation is not a flaw in human cognition. It is one of its most sophisticated features. But Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert, in research that tracked the real-time mental activity of thousands of people across their daily lives, found something quietly devastating. The human mind wanders from what it is actually doing roughly 47% of the time. Nearly half of waking life spent somewhere other than where the body is. And more striking than the frequency was what their data showed about what mental wandering does to well-being. A wandering mind, they found, is consistently a less happy mind. Not because the content of the wandering is always dark, but because absence from the present moment carries its own cost, regardless of where the mind goes. What neuroscience has added to this picture is something even more precise. When you imagine a scenario, an argument, a loss, a confrontation, a catastrophe, your brain does not process it as fiction. The same neural pathways that would activate if the event were actually happening light up for the imagined version. The amygdala responds. Cortisol moves. The body prepares. You are, physiologically, living through experiences that exist only in your mind. And if you do this repeatedly, running the same scenarios, rehearsing the same confrontations, pre-living the same disasters, the cumulative emotional toll is real. You arrive at the end of days that contained no actual crisis, genuinely exhausted by crises that never came. So the question that matters is not whether you do this. Almost everyone does. The question is what the imagining is protecting against, what it is reaching for. Because compulsive mental rehearsal is almost never random. It has a logic. It has a target. For some people, the scenarios are predominantly about control. Environments that were unpredictable in childhood, where the emotional weather of a household could shift without warning, where love or safety felt contingent on factors that kept changing, produce nervous systems finely tuned to anticipate. The mind that learned early that surprise is dangerous becomes a mind that pre-runs every possible outcome before walking into a room, not because it enjoys the exercise, but because arriving at a situation already having rehearsed it feels marginally safer than arriving unprepared. The imagining is not anxiety. It is the management strategy for anxiety that was never given a better tool. For others, the scenarios are about unprocessed grief or anger that has no real outlet. The argument you never had with the person who hurt you. The conversation where you finally said what you actually meant. Jennifer Freyd's research on betrayal trauma on what the mind does when it cannot safely process a hurt it was caused by someone it depended on, shows how the psyche routes unresolvable emotion into indirect channels. The mind keeps returning to the scene, not out of weakness or rumination for its own sake, but because something in the experience remains metabolically incomplete. The imagining is the mind's attempt to finish something it was never allowed to finish in real life. And for others still, the imagining is escape. Pure, architectural, elaborate escape. Entire parallel lives constructed in the mind. Different choices, different relationships, different versions of a self that felt more possible than the one currently being lived. This is not delusion. It is not pathology in the clinical sense. It is what the mind does when the gap between what it needs and what it has access to becomes too wide to sit with directly. The inner world fills what the outer world cannot. What each of these patterns shares is this: the imagining works. In the short term, it reliably delivers something: relief, control, resolution, escape, that the present moment is not currently providing. And the nervous system learns, not through conscious decision, but through repetition and reward. The mind that finds relief in rehearsal will return to rehearsal. The mind that finds completion in imagined confrontation will keep staging imagined confrontations. The behavior becomes self-sustaining, not because of weakness, but because it was once genuinely useful. The cost accrues quietly. It does not announce itself. What happens over time is a subtle recalibration of what feels real and what feels flat. The inner world, where you have complete control, where conversations go the way they should, where you get to say what you actually mean and hear what you actually needed to hear, that world gets richer, more responsive, more satisfying in its precision. And the outer world, with its messiness and its uncontrollability and its people who don't say the right thing and its moments that don't resolve cleanly, that world begins to feel thin by comparison, insufficient, hard to fully inhabit. Real relationships start to disappoint not because they are worse than they were, but because they are being unconsciously measured against versions that exist only in a mind where everything can be arranged exactly right. The anxiety does not decrease. This is the part that most surprises people who have been using mental rehearsal as an anxiety management tool for years. The pre-living of disasters does not reduce their emotional charge, it amplifies it. Each rehearsal deepens the neural groove. Each imagined confrontation that provides temporary relief creates a slightly stronger pull toward the next one. The mind learns that imagining manages the feeling, and so it imagines more, and the feeling requiring management grows. Presence becomes genuinely difficult. Not in the way that presence is difficult for someone simply distracted or bored, but in a more specific way, where the body is in the room and the mind is somewhere far from it, and the gap between the two becomes so familiar that closing it starts to feel like the stranger option. Stephen Hayes, whose development of acceptance and commitment therapy shifted how researchers and clinicians understand the relationship between thought and suffering, identified what he called cognitive fusion, the state in which a person cannot observe their thoughts from a distance, but is entirely merged with them, living inside each one as it arrives. For people whose minds have built elaborate imaginative worlds over years of practice, the challenge is not to think less. The challenge is to develop the capacity to notice the mind leaving without going with it every time. What research in ACT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and somatic awareness consistently points towards is not suppression. The mind's storytelling impulse is not a malfunction to be corrected. It is a feature to be redirected. The shift that gradually becomes possible through practice that is genuinely slow and genuinely non-linear is not the elimination of imagining, but the development of a kind of internal observer, a part of the mind that can register the moment of departure. There it goes. The mind is leaving. Something in the present moment is insufficient or threatening or incomplete, and the mind is reaching for its usual solution. That moment of noticing is not small. It is, in the research literature on psychological flexibility, the hinge point, the place where a different response becomes possible. Not immediately, not reliably at first, but increasingly over time with enough repetition of noticing rather than merging, the grip of the imagined world loosens slightly.
the present becomes fractionally more habitable. The body, located in actual space and actual time, begins to register as a place worth returning to. This does not happen because you decided to be more present. Decisions do not reach the nervous system at the depth where this lives. It happens because the mind slowly, incrementally develops a new skill. The skill of recognizing what it is reaching for when it leaves, and finding ways to meet that need that don't require disappearing. The need for resolution, the need for safety, the need for a world that responds predictably. Those needs are real. They were real before the imagining started. They will be real after it loosens. What changes is not the need, but the route the mind takes to try to meet it. If you are reading this and recognizing something, not comfortably, but in the specific way of something landing too accurately, then I want you to understand something about the mind you have built. The vividness of your inner world is not a disorder.